You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
There was a specific project for me that taught me how to think about different metrics of success. And on that specific project, it was talking to certain people who had come to see the show and to whom the show was really meaningful. Then I was like, okay, on this particular show, my metric of success is what this group of audience members felt coming out of this show. If that's always the way that you sort of approach making art, then everything will be successful in some way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Was It Chance, the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. I'm Heather Vickery.
And I'm Alan Seals, and Heather and I started off as two perfect strangers who met by chance and just embraced an opportunity and started a podcast. Listen in as we chat with other successful people about the risks they've taken to put themselves on a path to creative success. So we actually have, Heather, two guests today, not just one. This is
exciting.
Our first double guester, and they're talking about a film that they made together, and so I want to actually read about the film before I get into who they are. So in my best, coming this summer voice, here we go, and I've got some music for us too. In the wake of the global pandemic, The Show Must Go On chronicles the race against time to save live theater and focuses in on some of the some of the theater makers determined to win it. In March of 2020, and for the first time in history, the performing arts were decimated worldwide when theater shut down indefinitely in every country except one, South Korea. From the frontlines in Seoul, the film follows a company of artists involved in two theatrical productions, the world tour of Phantom of the Opera and the South Korean tour of Cats, two of the productions that pushed ahead safely during the pandemic.
Wow. It is too early for that, Alan.
And a continent away in the UK. The film simultaneously follows Andrew Lloyd Webber, composer of Cats and the Phantom of the Opera. Among much else, he uses the example set by his Korean colleagues to fight for the theater's future on the West End and beyond. The Show Must Go On chronicles the survival of the performing arts and worldwide resuscitation of an art form. All right, that's enough Cats for me. The Show Must Go On, co-directed and produced by both Sammi Berinstein, Dori Berinstein, and Sammi Cannold.
This is what happens when I let Alan do all of the pre-work.
More coffee. Sammi Berinstein. Have you ever been called that before, Sammi?
I've never been called that. That's a wild hybrid. Oh my.
This is worlds colliding for me, and I am so happy. Heather, podcaster, Dori, podcaster, business partner, producer, Broadway lover, Sammi, producer, director, podcaster. All of this is coming together in such a fun way, and we'll get into bios later because you guys both have bios that are longer than my arms. But I want to talk about The Show Must Go On because this is a documentary, and Sammi, this is your first documentary. Dori, this is your umpteenth million documentary. So where did the two of you even get the idea to start recording this, filming this, making this?
Sorry, it cut out. I don't know what you asked. I'll move to the other room though.
In a world where Sammi doesn't have good Wi-Fi, she has to move to another room.
I'm moving to the other room.
Well, so while Sammi is moving to the other room, this show is about embracing opportunity, taking intentional risks to be creative. And hopefully that leads us to success, but it leads us to creativity, which is something that we had to go out of our way to have during the pandemic. And I think that's one of what I love the most about your documentary is you brought all of those things together. So yeah, I'm with Alan. I want to know how this came to be.
Well, exactly what you're talking about. I mean, Sammi will go into detail, but in essence, there were people all over the world when theater shut down that came to Korea to keep theater alive, to put the show on, and we wanted to celebrate that. We wanted to document that.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I was alone in my apartment, very bummed out that our life form had sort of just disappeared. There was no theater makers all around the world were sort of confused about what to do, how to make a living. That's not news to anybody here. I was FaceTiming with my friend, Kristen Blodgett, who is the musical supervisor of Phantom of the Opera World Tour, and she supervises a lot of the Cats tours that go out around the world. This was June of 2020, and she said at some point in our FaceTime, oh, in a few weeks I'm actually going to South Korea to mount the South Korean tour of Cats. And I was dumbfounded because at the time, nobody was going anywhere, let alone going anywhere to do theater. I was asking, how is that possible? I'd heard that, the Phantom of the Opera was, at the time that it opened in Korea, the only large-scale English language production running anywhere in the world. So I knew that something was going on in South Korea, but didn't quite realize that it was the country that was sort of like keeping musical theater alive. I immediately was like, this has to be documented. And I went to Dori, who also happens to be my mother, and, because she's a very experienced documentarian. And I said, I've never made a documentary before. Do you want to partner on this? Because I can get on a plane and go to Korea, but I don't know what I'm doing. And you know what you're doing. So maybe we have sort of a way to work together here. And she said yes immediately. And then we wrote to Andrew Lloyd Webber and we said, hey, can we document what your productions are doing in Korea? And he said yes, and all the other parties said yes. And then we were sort of off and running from there.
We had that question. My partner and I watched the documentary last night. We couldn't quite figure out if people were filming their own things, if you had the idea after and you just worked really hard to piece these things together. So you actually went and filmed this live.
Wow. There was a crew with you.
Couldn't have been much of one.
I think it was much more ragtag than you'd think. First of all, this was June and July of 2020. There was no vaccine. We were all quarantined. Nobody was going anywhere. And it's not like, hey, let's hire a crew. Let's go to Korea. It wasn't like that. It was much more kind of daredevil and getting on a plane.
Yeah.
Which Sammi did. We really had 3 weeks prep, which is crazy for a doc. You just don't have 3 weeks prep. I had been shooting a doc in Korea pre-pandemic and did have a shooter on the ground that, because it was the pandemic, he was available and was willing to take this on. But, we kind of threw ourselves into this without having any real plan in place other than getting thumbs up and yeses from people. We had to figure it out as everything unfolded. And Sammi was frontline and really, went into this not knowing what was ahead, never having done a doc, never having shot anything before. And she had to figure it out as she went along. And so it really was kind of crazy. In answer to your question, we immediately contacted the casts of both shows and asked that they document their own travel to Korea as they were coming from South Africa and the Philippines and Australia and the UK and the United States, from all over the world descending on South Korea to help save theater. And so we asked them to document their own travel moments. And then we pick up with them in Korea.
I have 4 daughters, and I'm very curious as a mother, right? And a artist and a creator and a producer and all of these amazing things you do. The show must go on, no pun intended. But the mother side of you, sending your child out into this pandemic world, what was that like for you?
That's a really good question. One, there was no stopping her. 2, it was very clear that things were only getting worse in New York, and Sammi was smack in the middle of New York City, and things in Korea, as we document in the film, were at the time far more under control. I mean, there was still COVID being, spread all over the place, but I felt that she'll go into detail about being embedded with both productions, but that it was actually a safer place. And it also would give her purpose. And it was we felt very strongly it was a very important moment to capture. For all those reasons, it was not easy wearing the mom hat. It was torture having her so far away from me every single day, every single moment. but it was the right thing to do as her business partner, and it was also wearing the mom hat again. I felt she was in a relatively safer situation.
I think I was also just driving her nuts, calling every day, just being like, what is my life's purpose? I can't make theater. And she was like, okay, well, we need to get her busy doing something.
I can see the mom side of that.
Accurate.
Yeah.
That is so accurate. Yes.
But something you said, as I watched the show, I found myself getting re-angry at the way the pandemic was handled here in the United States because of how Korea handled it, which was, they really mitigated it well, and we didn't. So you were probably better off, Sammi.
Sammi, what was that like for you going out there and being able to, like, literally, when we see in the documentary, you sit down with Andrew Lloyd Webber and you're talking with him, and he's probably, like, was he in South Korea the whole time, or did he just fly out? Or, like, that whole process of working with the team and, like what Dori was saying, being embedded with the cast, right? So I guess, did you become part of their bubble? And what was that like for you, just sitting out there watching this happen in somewhat of a, I mean, it sounds like it was somewhat of a normal tech opening process in this country that actually handled it way better than the U.S. did.
Yeah. So I, when I got to Korea, I had to quarantine for 2 weeks in a government facility. And basically what that meant was that I was put in a hotel room. I was not allowed to leave the hotel room. I was told that if I left, I would be deported. They brought 3 meals a day. They came to the room and tested us. It was, it was pretty intense. And then once I was out, then I was in the bubble. I started with the Cats Company, and I would sort of switch back and forth between the Cats Company and the Phantom Company at different times. Each time there was sort of a process to make sure that I wasn't being a bridge between the two companies, because that would also be sort of problematic. The companies were not integrated, but it was amazing because I, as a director, a theater director, I never get to go on tour. It's not, unless you're like a resident on a tour, it's very rare that theater directors get to go on tour. And all of a sudden I was like getting to live my best life on a Cats tour. Like, it was just, a very bizarre, gift and experience in that way. And the Andrew portion of it, we actually shot that in London. So when I was done in Korea, I stayed there for 3 months. And then once we were done shooting in Korea, I flew to London where there was no quarantine. Then I interviewed Andrew there and did some other shoots that are in the film there in London. Because part of what we were trying to communicate in the film is that Korea really pioneered how to reopen. And then London learned from Korea, and then we learned from London. And I think that memorializing how that happened is really important to me. And I know to Dori as well, like that theatrical history documents that in this moment of need, it was South Korea that led the way.
That's so cool. You mentioned something that you stayed in a government facility. So did you have to get government permission to do this? Or was it just like anybody coming in from certain countries had to quarantine and the government monitored it? Or like, were they involved with the process at all other than just quarantining?
Yeah, in my case, it was just sort of like, I just showed up and I had to fill out some paperwork ahead of time, but it wasn't like I didn't get special permission because during the pandemic, you were allowed to go to Korea without a visa if it was for under 90 days. So that's why I left at the culmination of 3 months. I would have kept living in Korea because it was great. I mean, it was like functional. But the Cats Company and the Phantom Company, everybody working in those companies, they all had visas. And so the government knew there were these people from all over the world that were coming in and were cool with it and excited about it. And really, it's the Korean government kept theaters open when it seemed like they wouldn't. There was a time while I was there where professional sports teams were not allowed to practice, but theater could happen. There was a time where nursery schools were shut down,
Wow.
but theater was allowed to stay open. It was just, the government recognized that the way protocol work in the theater makes the theater uniquely safe when compared to other public activities. and allowed it to stay open.
All right, so we're relocating Broadway to South Korea. I think that's
I think that's the message.
that's the most logical thing.
So, Dori, what were you working on while Sammi was in South Korea? I'm sure you found lots of ways to stay busy, but what was happening for you? Where were you, and what was happening for you?
I basically didn't move from this spot for 2 years. Almost. There was a lot. There actually was quite a bit of shooting that we did in the tri-state area. I was capturing things locally. I was also producing from afar because obviously we had to manage all the crew. We also had to manage the footage that was coming in and bring on an editorial team, manage all the footage and figure out how we were going to capture it, figure out all the rights issues, the music issues, everything that was around putting this film together. There was a tremendous amount to do, not to mention raising the financing for it. Yeah. And because it, obviously this all costs money to do. We have tremendous partners on this project that really from the get-go said, we're in. We want this to happen. We want to support this. And Liz Armstrong was there day one, and so grateful for that. And WYSIWYG, executive producer and WYSIWYG in South Korea, also joined forces with us, and we're so grateful to both of them.
Heather, I want to also point out that both of these two individuals we are talking to today are two of the most humble, non-braggery people ever that you will meet. So Dori Berinstein is an Emmy Award-winning documentarian, 4-time Tony Award-winning Broadway producer, Olivier Award winner, and most recently joined Ryan Murphy as the producer of Golden Globe Award-nominated Netflix feature adaptation of her musical The Prom, and also co-founded Broadway Podcast Network with me and is the CEO. Sammi
Just a few things.
Just a few things. Sammi is a director who's one of Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 and worked for CBS, Nickelodeon, Paramount Plus, Cirque du Soleil. We mentioned this is her first documentary feature, but now has new projects including musicals, revivals, feature films. She's been an associate director on Great Comet with Josh Groban. I mean, come on. These two people are like, you asked Dori what she's doing. All she answered was about this project.
Had a hard time staying busy.
No, what I'm saying is Dori's not going to be the one to tell you everything she was doing because we have to say what she's doing. And Sammi too. The two of them are like, I've never met two people, by the way, Heather, that are they have the least amount of ego in this business. Show business is all about ego, and these two people do it for the art of creating and for the love of theater, not for themselves. And that's so fucking rare in this business from a creative standpoint.
I think that showed in the documentary.
Thanks, guys.
That it's about creativity.
That's so nice.
You're welcome. And one of the exciting things that we went through, Dori, and this applied to sort of everything, is as the pandemic hit, we're launching a podcast network. We have to figure out how to go virtual, how to record over the internet, how to exist without in-person opportunities. And so I remember Sammi, like it was opening night of, I think it was Cats, right? Where it was one of the early days of figuring out how to record people remotely. We had you interviewing... who were you interviewing in the house before the house opened on opening night?
Kristen Blodgett.
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right, Alan. Thank you. Yeah, that was a beautiful moment in the film, and thank you for making that happen.
Yeah, so you're welcome. We had to figure out how to capture on the fly last minute. It was, we're 12-hour difference or something, whatever it was. So it's literally like the morning time here in New York, and it's you're literally getting kicked out of the house.
You woke up very early to do that.
And so it's I love the chance encounter of all of this because I mean, again, like this is the time. Don't be humble, right? We want to know. I mean, you're just like, yeah, I just contacted Andrew Lloyd Webber. Like, everybody just can't contact Andrew Lloyd Webber, right? So you just contacted this guy who a couple of people have heard of, and you just happen to get these producers, and then you just happen to fly out there, and then along the way, looking back, what are some of the biggest chances that both of you were able to embrace to really pull this project together and make it come together?
You mentioned at the beginning a lot of what you talk about on this podcast is about taking risks. And I think that it was a huge risk to go make this film. We didn't know if Phantom and Cats were going to make it. We didn't know if Cats was going to open. We didn't know if Phantom was going to stay open. In fact, both shows were basically able to survive Korea. Phantom then went to Taiwan, but then it had a whole leg of its tour in China that had to be called off because of COVID. And so we felt very lucky that there was actually something to document, because I could have showed up in Korea and both shows could have been shut down,
Yeah.
Talk about risk.
It was just sort of like, what are we going to find? And we sort of came to the conclusion that, like, if that was what happened, we would document that too. We just wanted to capture a moment in time and how a community was sort of approaching it and struggling with it. And I think from a dramatic storytelling perspective, I'm very grateful that the film ends on a note of triumph and on a note of inspiring others to follow suit. But it could have been a very different film. I think a lot had to be put on the table with hope and confidence from all involved parties, and we're really grateful for that.
I'm just going to add that I think that on the risk-taking front, when there were limitations on how we could capture in what was going on in Korea, we were allowed to have a crew of 2, and that included Sammi. So we had a shooter and we had Sammi. And we had a giant musical and a huge cast. And that, having done many documentaries about theater, that's not how you do it. And Sammi wasn't a shooter. She had never done this before. And so, in terms of risk creatively as well as practically, kind of just to dive into this situation in a foreign country with a crew she hadn't worked with before, and earn everyone's trust so that they were comfortable with her capturing all the behind the scenes of 2 separate companies and learning how to shoot and do all that she had to do. It's quite extraordinary. She's not going to say it, but I will say it for her. And I think when you look at the film, it's certainly, it's a little scrappy, as it should be under the circumstances. But, given the reality of how it was captured, it's extraordinary, I think, that we really were able to tell this story and capture sound. Oh my goodness, just basically capture sound, capture the visuals, and have everyone on board to being part of this, and kind of Herculean. And what a partner. Is all I can say. What a partner.
I love that. Sammi, I'd be curious to know, while you were on the ground in Korea, what chance opportunities presented themselves that you didn't anticipate? You're like, oh, we're going to lean in this way. Oh, I'm going to do it like this.
We had a very funny phrase, because there were a lot of Australians working on both shows. And in Australia, you call a documentary a doco, which I find very funny. So we had a saying when anything bad would happen, because I would always just grab the camera right away and start filming. And I would sort of get excited when bad things would happen, which is sick, but it would be like, I would be like, that's drama. And these aren't like people dying bad things. They're like, theatrically speaking, bad things. But
I broke a shoelace.
Exactly. I'd be like, oh my God, drama. But we had this phrase that was like, bad for the humans, good for the doco. So anytime anything bad would happen, we'd go like, bad for the humans, good for the doco. The biggest one of those was basically that when the Phantom tour was, when I got there, the Phantom tour was finishing up in Seoul, and it was about to go to another Korean city called Daegu. And Daegu was the epicenter of the outbreak of COVID in South Korea. It was one of the first cities in the world, to get significantly hit. So it was a really big deal that Phantom was coming back to Daegu, that it was reopening the city. And just as Phantom was about to go from Seoul to Daegu, numbers started to go up again. It got very, very dramatic very quickly. Obviously, that was difficult for the Phantom company, but it was very dramatic for the camera.
The power of television.
Yeah, it's we were not there, because Phantom opened in Korea on April 1st, 2020. And if I had the, foresight to know to be there on April 1st, 2020, certainly we would have been there. But all of that, the 2 COVID cases that came up in the Phantom Company, which is a large part of what we follow in the Phantom storyline in the film, all of that happened before I got there. But through the generosity of the company members sharing iPhone footage with us, through, other things that through interviews, we were able to sort of document that part of it retroactively, and then everything after June in real time.
What's the chance of, I guess, Dori, from your experience, using iPhones? Because Sammi just mentioned the iPhone footage, and when we've been on shoots together, you're always capturing 4K footage with your iPhone 26, whatever it is, and like back in the day, literally back in the day, like 5-6 years ago, you couldn't use footage off of cameras like this.
I do it all the time. There are apps that allow you to capture 4K footage on your iPhone. I'm shooting other docs right now, and I particularly in situations where you have to be a little discreet. You can't have a whole crew behind you, or you're on the move, or something happens spontaneously. You have a real good quality camera with you. I think the problem is more that it's you don't have the sound support that you need to really capture something incredible. So it's supplementary. But I've often, when I know I'm in a shoot where I have great sound, I'll be the 4th camera, or I'll be the 2nd camera, or whatever, with my iPhone. And that footage has consistently been great. I love it. And it's all over the movie that you saw. The Show Must Go On.
What's one of the biggest apparent setbacks when the two of you started to film and put footage together, and things where you're like, I don't know how we're going to overcome this, that you all of a sudden turned around, you're like, oh, this is great, actually. We can pivot this way, and all of a sudden it becomes this great thing?
Well, interestingly, we were only originally going to follow the Cats Company, because that's what was happening in real time. Their process was happening in real time. And then there were some like travel complications. Things got a little complicated. And Gareth Hewitt Williams, who's in the film quite a lot, who